The topic of dreams is endlessly fascinating. Some think they're profound, that they contain hidden messages. Some think they're trivial, don't mean anything. But one thing's for sure, we've struggled to make sense of them, to contextualize them into our daily lives since time immemorial. For our animistic ancestors, for instance, or even contemporary animists, dreams are often seen as a vector for nature to speak to us, spirits, our ancestors. Similarly, for the ancient Greeks, dreams were seen as a possible way to connect to higher consciousness, to receive transmissions from gods. In fact, there was a widely practiced ritual across the Hellenistic world and beyond called incubation. Incubation involved traveling to a temple and sleeping in a sacred designated space on the grounds with the aim of receiving healing or a prophetic dream from the god that inhabited the temple. In a more contemporary sense, dreams are often discussed in a therapeutic context or a sense-making context. And for this, we largely have the two godfathers of psychological analysis to thank, Freud and Jung. Thank or blame, depending on your point of view. So dreaming and what dreams mean is really a question that's evolved over time along with the human mind and our struggle to make sense of it. But I recently came across a way of viewing dreaming that really marries the mind with the mystery, a way of looking at dreaming that truly floored me. And I think it's going to alter the way that you look at dreams, you understand dreams, and even your whole psyche for the rest of your life. If we want to understand this way of seeing, we need a little bit more context first. So as I mentioned, Freud was really the one who popularized the notion that dreams were significant in a modern sense, that they contained important information that could and should be recognized, that dream content could be sort of rescued from the depths of the unconscious and be translated into useful information for our waking life. If you've ever read any Freud, there's no doubt the man was a genius. He was an extremely deep thinker. He was well equipped in the language of myth, and he often used it. But ultimately, his philosophy on dreams was able to be shoehorned in to the rational and empirical mindset of his day. For Freud, the dream meant something, but it was usually talked about as some kind of esoteric rearrangement of daytime material, of residue left over from our waking life, typically tying back to our instinctual needs for sleep and sexuality. Freud called dreams a compromise between the demands of the night world and the day world. Interestingly, Freud did actually delineate between the way that dreams appeared and the dreams themselves, that these daily residues were not the dream itself, that they themselves did not form the dream, rather they were just how the dream appeared to us. We'll leave that mystery there for the sake of this video, but what's important to know about Freud is that his goal with dream analysis was translation. How can we translate dream material, dreams, into something useful for our daily life? And this sort of thinking, this translation approach, is how I think most people in a sort of knee-jerk way look at dreams today. You try to remember your dream, tell your friends, bring them to your therapist, and you muse about what it really means, how it applies to your waking life, your relationships, your jobs, whatever. As mentioned before, Jung, the great mythopoetic Swiss psychiatrist, is also seen as one of the godfathers of dream theory. For Jung, dreams were not about translation, but bringing the unconscious and conscious mind together, about assisting the integration and individuation process. Jung believed that by marrying the unconscious material of the dream with the conscious mind, we could mature our psyche, take another step on that aforementioned individuation process, Jung's sort of magnum opus of psychic maturation. As psychologist James Hillman puts it in The Dream and the Underworld, which we're going to be borrowing from heavily in this transmission, Jungians read dreams for their information regarding the process of individuation, for their symbolic, not literal content. We relate them to the ego only in compensation to fill out its inadequate attitude. Dream interpretation makes a bridge between day and night, creating a new midway standpoint, both inner and outer life. Jung's take on dreaming is very appealing to me personally for a number of reasons, which I'm sure will not surprise any of you, but this is not the way of seeing dreams that I was alluding to. It's certainly in the direction of this way of seeing, but it's not the whole story. This is a way of seeing that comes from who we just quoted, the psychologist James Hillman. In Hillman's view, the dream is neither something to be translated, as Freud would have it, or compensatory, as Jung would. It's a philosophy that takes the dream as seriously as possible. So seriously that we prostrate ourselves, we prostrate our egos to the dream image itself. In Hillman's philosophy, we don't bring our egos into the equation at all, or as little as possible, other than the fact that we are the ones experiencing them and engaging with them as investigators. Hillman spoke about this way of seeing dreams throughout his career and throughout his life, but where you'll really find the argument in all of its glory is in his book, The Dream and the Underworld, where he says, quote, "To go in this direction, we must sever the link with the day world, foregoing all ideas that originate there. And we must go over the bridge into the dream and let it fall behind us. And if it will not fall, then let it burn." So what is this bridge? Where does it lead? What is this dream realm that it leads to? Well, according to Hillman, it's synonymous with the underworld. So before we get into this underworld tie-in, why do we need to invoke myth? Well, as Hillman puts it, mythology is the psychology of antiquity, psychology is the mythology of modernity. Just as the ancients didn't seem to have psychology proper, we, in a modern sense, have no living myth, no agreed-upon mythological ground to start from. Hillman's personal psychological philosophy, what he called archetypal psychology, seeked to rectify this by marrying myth and psychology. Quote, "Our tenet also operates upon every mythic tale and figure, removing them from the realm of story only and pulling them down and in, showing how a myth precisely works in the psyche, in its habits of mind and heart." So in Hillman's mind, there's an inseparable link between myth and psychology that's always been there. So now that we've established that, why does Hillman invoke the underworld here? What does the underworld have to do with dreams? For Hillman, and as he points out, many ancient cultures, the underworld is synonymous with the invisible realm, the hidden realm. Not as an afterlife that's at some point in the hopefully far-off future, but a hidden realm that is here and now. And a really brain-melting idea that Hillman introduces here, and again refers to numerous cultures who seem to think this way, the realm of the dead is not something separate from us. In fact, our psyches are in it right now. They're simultaneously in both the living realm and in the underworld. And in a sense, our psyches wake up to this underworld at night in dreaming and sleeping. Quote, "The underworld is a realm of only psyche, a pure psychical world. What one meets there is soul." Or, to say this in another way, underworld is the mythological style of describing a psychological cosmos. And again, this is a cosmos that we drop into in the night world, in the world of sleeping and dreaming. The historical mythological connections between dreams and sleeping and the underworld and death are numerous and incredibly fascinating, but to greatly nutshell it, as I mentioned, when we sleep, our psyche essentially wakes up to the underworld, a realm where the invisible becomes visible, the impossible becomes possible. Traditional daytime structures like time and space, cause and effect, don't apply. And I'm sure many of you can relate to this, that you've experienced strange phenomena in dreams, whole landscapes shifting at the seeming drop of a hat. And this is indeed the way that many ancient cultures, including the Greeks, viewed the underworld, that it's a realm where the upper world rules don't apply, or sometimes the upper world rules are inverted. And interestingly, according to Hillman, this is why you apparently don't see temples to gods like Hades and other underworld gods above ground, because they don't belong in that realm. They don't belong outside of the underworld. On that note, if you do even a cursory investigation of these underworld gods or this chthonic pantheon, you will very quickly notice this extant relationship between sleeping, dreaming, the underworld, and death. For instance, Hades was, of course, the ruler of this realm, and he had two twin sons. And who were these sons? Thanatos, death, and Hypnos, dreaming. So let that sink in. The god of death and the god of dreams are twins. Hillman also points out that in the Odyssey, Homer locates dreams in the underworld, in the house of Hades as well. And there's a lot more here. This relationship between the underworld and dreams even seems to span across cultures. Hillman points out that in the Hindu pantheon, it's said that dreams come from Yama, the Lord of Death. And something that I just happened to stumble across yesterday, in Tibetan dream yoga, it's said that dream yoga is a preparation for Bardo yoga. So if you're not familiar with this concept of Tibetan dream yoga or the concept of Bardos, essentially they believe that after death you enter an intermediate plane of existence, a Bardo, and that if you become an adept in dream yoga, in maintaining a level of awareness in dreams, you may also be able to travel more skillfully, more mindfully through the Bardo of death to your next rebirth. As writer Andrew Holasek puts it, all of dream yoga and sleep yoga is preparation for death. There's an intimate relationship between the process of going to sleep, dreaming, and waking up, and the process of dying, the after-death state, and being reborn. So now that we've established this psychical relationship between dreaming and the underworld, or at least a mythological relationship between the two, this begs the question, what is actually visiting you in dreams? When you receive a dream or a dream image, what is its true identity? Before we broach this topic, I think it's important to introduce the concept of Jungian archetypes. I have a whole video on archetypes I highly encourage you to check out, but for the sake of this one, what's important to understand is that archetypes are universal symbols or patterns that span across cultures, that exist deep within a realm that Jung called the collective unconscious, a sort of ocean of psyche that contains primordial symbolic building blocks of the human psyche. According to Jung, this realm of the collective unconscious and the archetypes that live there are the source of formative cultural myths, gods, and goddesses. Of course, because these myths, narrative structures, symbols are so endemic to the way that we think, they greatly shape our view of the world and how we make sense of it. So now back to this question. What is the true identity of these images that visit you during dreams? To answer this question, Hillman again pulls from myth. He quotes Jung and several other thinkers, and he gives a pretty blunt answer. Quote, "The persons I engage with in dreams are neither representations, simulacra, of their living selves, nor a part of myself. They are shadow images that fill archetypal roles. They are personae, masks in the hollow of which is a numen." So if you're unfamiliar with that term, you can essentially think of it as divine. So what's coming to us in dreams is essentially the divine wearing the mask of whatever the image is. So if you're dreaming of your brother or a beautiful woman or an ancestor, according to Hillman and according to the myths that he cites, what you're really interacting with is a god wearing the persona, the image of that person. Or if you don't like the word god, archetype. One of the examples that Hillman points to here is there are several instances from Homer in which a god appears to a dreamer under the guise of a living friend. So to really put a bow on the thought, Hillman gives an example of being visited by a professor in a dream, a professor that you know, that you have positive feelings about, that you think is a real representative of wisdom. According to Hillman, this professor is not a metaphor for intellectual potential or a route to simply psychical wholeness like Jung may reach for. This is the very living archetype of the wise man, of the mentor, and the dream is merely using this professor that you know as a mask for that archetype. So this way of seeing dreams is essentially as mythopoetic as it gets. And I think we have to ask the question, what do we do with this information? Is it actually helpful in any way? What is the usable wisdom here? The goal, according to Hillman, is to take the dream image as seriously as possible. Not try to translate it into something for you, but try to take it literally. To stay with the image itself, to allow the image to continue working on you, on your psyche. This is done, Hillman argues, by becoming fascinated with the image. As Hillman says in his Blue Fire lecture series, if we see a beautiful mountain, we don't ask the question, what does this mountain mean for me? We revel in its beauty, we appreciate it. And he argues that we should do the same thing when we're presented with a dream image. Quote, you as the person have to step back so that the images can come forward. The moment an image comes up and you're interpreting it, you're standing in the way of it. Hillman actually went further and argued that by making the dream image about us, we may actually be hurting ourselves. And he extends this beyond dreams. He makes it clear that anything that's happening to us often is not about us, and that we are pathologizing everything that happens to us in a way if we're trying to fit it into the narrow confines of our ego. If, as Jung said, modern man is in search of a soul, this soul is partly lost in life. The attempts of modern psychotherapy to connect dreams to life only strengthen the ego at the cost of the soul. The underworld aspect of each complex, where it touches death, is also where psyche is in the unchanging essence and where soul can be refound. So what he's really proposing is that we trust psyche, we trust soul and consciousness at large, trust that it's in some process, that we are involved in that process, but it's not all about us. And this, of course, applies specifically to when it presents us with a dream image. It's doing something. It's undergoing some kind of symbolic process. Let's talk about another dream image example that Hillman gives in this same lecture. An image with a lot of potential mythological and archetypal baggage, a black snake.
You can spend a whole hour with this black snake talking about the devouring mother, talking about the anxiety, talking about the repressed sexuality, talking about the natural mind, all these interpretive moves that people make, and what is left, what is vitally important, is what that snake is doing. Now that's important distinction between interpretation and imagination. And the moment you've defined the snake, interpreted it, you've lost the snake, and then the person leaves the hour with a concept about my repressed sexuality, or my cold black passions, or my mother, or whatever it is, and you've lost the snake. The tasks of analysis is to keep the snake there, the black snake, and there are various ways for keeping the black snake.
So again, he wants us to keep the image there working on our minds for as long as possible. He wants us to be curious about it, to interact with it, to imagine it, to fully try to process it in all of its detail, to not try to reduce it down to something that makes sense for us in the day world. In doing this, by keeping the image alive, we are expanding the mystery, we're deepening the mystery. In reducing that black snake down into any of those examples, the devouring mother or whatever, we are in a sense killing the living imagination. We're killing the presence of that other world in our psyche. And we're also grasping to make sense of the mystery, to make sense of a mystery that really is already in its fully formed emanation. Really what he wants us to do is promote the mystery, to keep that deep well of psychic imagery here and now, working on us. When we reduce it down to a pathology or a devouring mother complex, he's arguing that we're killing it. We're cutting ourselves off from that natural process of living in this imaginal field of mystery. I understand that this way of looking at dreams is pretty puzzling, but what it does is point us toward Hillman's larger point, toward Hillman's larger philosophy on psychology and the human mind in general, which is, of course, complex and multifaceted and profound. But one of my favorite lines from him that really sums it up is that Hillman wants to put the soul back into psyche. Of course, this is originally what the word psyche meant to the Greeks, soul. Hillman argued that one of the primary causes for this great psychic sickness that we're all experiencing, and that I think has only clearly gotten much worse since he passed away, is because we have stripped the soul from psyche and the world at large. We've abandoned the sacred and the soulful in favor of the statistical, the practical, the easy, the convenient, and the puritanical. And in doing so, we've removed the dynamic, living spirit of life. So really, Hillman's way of seeing when it comes to dreams or anything else is about promoting mystery, bowing to the mystery, not trying to shake it down for answers, but deepen it. Hopefully promote new, big, soul-animating questions about life and the human condition. Is this the most practical way to look at the human psyche, and specifically dreams in this case? I don't know. But do I think Hillman is onto something? That he has a gloriously important point when he talks about needing to revivify life with more mystery, prostrate the ego to the great mystery? Absolutely. And on that note, I really love this musing from the end of The Dream and the Underworld. Quote, "Our task is less to integrate dreams and dreaming into a psychological system that could give us a positive feeling of knowing about them than it is to see those systems as dreams." My argument here sounds like theory 2 of several souls in different regions of wholes and parts, but it is meant as a heuristic device to encourage an attitude that can live with the defeat of our desire to know. And in my experience, the defeat of our desire to know, coming to terms with the fact that we'll never know the answers to life's greatest questions, only leads to a deeper, more honest relationship with the great mystery of being alive. I know this way of viewing dreams is pretty extreme, but let me know what you think in the comments. Is this a useful way of seeing? Has this altered your perception of your mind and dreams at large? Either way, so much love for watching, my friends. Please tickle that algorithm with a like and a sub. It is of the utmost importance, and I'll see you in the next transmission.